Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's discussion is going to focus on the Libya-Rwanda evacuation program regarding refugees that were brought from Libya to Rwanda on September 26. A total of 66 refugees were evacuated and are currently being hosted at the Kashora Transit Center. Joining the conversation tonight, I'm going to start with our guest on my immediate right is Mr. Olivier Kayumba, and Olivier is the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry in charge of Emergency Management. Mr. Kayumba, very glad to have you here.
Thank you. Good evening.
We also have on my left, we have Barbara Bentham William Dotse, who's the UNHCR Deputy Representative in Rwanda. Great to have you on the show, Barbara.
Thank you.
As always, we are joined by our resident panelists. Brenna Namata is a resident panelist of The Square. Brenna, great to have you. We didn't have you last week.
Thank you, Dana.
Yes. You're welcome. Also, resident panelist of The Square is Charles Haber, but Charles is not with us today. He's traveled to Bonn, Germany for Rwanda Day, but he'll be watching the show from wherever he is. My name is Dana Mpisi. I am the host of The Square, and before we start, we're going to do what we always do, a brief midweek highlight. And Bren, I'll start with you. I know you have some interesting points you'd like to raise before we start tonight's show.
There's so much going on, so sometimes it's difficult to keep up with, what's happening. Impeachment, then you have strong winds, climate change. But anyway, for me, what really caught my eyes this week was headline around maternity leave. And I think there are considerations in Parliament for extension for people who are for mothers with multiple births. And
more than one child.
Yes. And for me, I just feel that it's absurd that we still have this debate around, mothers and maternity leave. We all know what it takes to raise a child. So if we still feel that women have to justify, and you really have to go through a lot of explanations to say women deserve at least 6 months for them to recover, to get back to work. I think we have a problem.
And what's your?
I think that shouldn't be subject to debate, honestly. And
so
being a gender country, yes, being a gender country, I think we should walk the talk. It should be 6 months.
Without
because, and I understand that there's a cost to it, but if we can find costs, the funds for electricity, for all these other things, why can't we find funds to fund women? Because in the end, what we are seeing actually, because I have had colleagues who have given birth, 3 months, they come back, they're actually weak, they're still weak, depending on the delivery, they are still weak, they are not as productive. And I think we would do ourselves a big favor as a country if we allow these women to actually recover. Now, 6 months is actually minimum. For most women, it takes a year to actually recover. So I think it's a cost. We have to look at productivity. Do you want to have productive people at work, or are you just saying just rush to work and then you leave your child? We also haven't talked about the issue of nursing, in workplaces. In most cases, they're just telling these mothers, report back to work. And she's there 2-3 hours, and then she's worried about going back to breastfeed. There are no nursing options. We have to do something.
I totally agree with you. I think this should be a topic maybe for The Square. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Kayumba and Barbara, great to have you on the show. Tonight we're talking about a very significant moment in Africa. Rwanda is a small country. It's a country that's not, we don't have resources at our disposal, but we are willing to take in a certain number of refugees compared to countries, let's say in the West, that are more resource, blessed and are very different in their approach to how they receive refugees. So this is something that we thought we'd discuss on The Square and also hear from you, from UNHCR as well as the ministry on this particular topic. And I'll start with you, Barbara. And just to kick off the conversation, we want to understand, the experience of these refugees coming from Libya. If you can just start by telling us, what has the experience been in Libya? What to Rwandans who have been very pro, refugees and welcoming these refugees from Libya. Mostly, where are they from mostly, and what has been the experience in Libya before being evacuated to Rwanda?
Okay, I'll start with the nationalities so far. The majority we have are from the Eastern Horn of Africa. Out of the 66 that arrived in the first group, we have 41 from Eritrea, and then the remaining 15 are split between Somalians and Sudanese. And these are people from countries which generate refugees, because as you know, there are conflicts in most of these countries. Regarding conditions in Libya, we know there's a lot of fighting going on. In July, one of our detention centers was bombed. 50 refugee and asylum seekers were affected. And what we've learned about conditions from Libya are testimonies of some of the people who've come. And the situation is dire, there's bombing, the detention centers are crowded, and some have been subjected to all sorts of abuse. I think for us, the major abuse is psychological. These are really traumatized people. We have the story of one person who has been in a detention center for 4 years.
Wow.
Yes, imagine.
4 years.
4 years, and had never been out. We also have...
is this person part of the refugees that were evacuated to Rwanda?
Yes,
okay.
They are. We also have one who was in the detention center that was bombed in July. He survived, but is going through post-trauma. We also have children or a baby born in detention.
Yes,
we
a 2-month-old baby.
Yes. And we also have a minor lady who tried to escape. The boat capsized, was rescued by lifeguards and brought to a detention center. So this sort of paints a picture. It's quite a bleak picture, actually, for those who've been in detention in Libya.
And what are the detention centers like? They're not, and earlier before we were having this conversation, it's not like a transit center. It's more like a prison. I mean, you're being detained there against your will. Is that what it's like?
Some are detained there, but it's difficult on the Rwanda side to talk to conditions in Libya, having regard to the fact that we haven't been. But what we know is that it's very crowded, cramped, and the conditions are not good.
They're not good. And just very quickly, you mentioned a lot of the impact, the long-term effects of this sort of abuse that they go for is, mental.
Yes.
So are there psychosocial services, and I'll also turn this over to the peers, but are there psychosocial services that are being offered to them at the Gashora Transit Center?
Yes, we are working with partners. With UNHCR, a lot of our activities are with partners. Yes. We have a health partner that works closely with the Ministry of Health. In addition to that, we have a partner whose role is to assist us with psychosocial support, counseling, and also things to help them, things like recreational games. We also want to go into language training. A lot of them have expressed the desire to learn English. So we want them to learn English, Kenya, Rwanda, as part of the healing process. So we do have things that we are doing to aid the psychosocial healing.
Okay. And before I come to you, Brenna, if I can allow Permanent Secretary Mr. Kayumba to also join in on this particular question. If you can just tell us, what are their resettlement plans in Rwanda? Are they going to stay in Rwanda? Are they going to go to third countries? Are they going to be integrated into the Rwandan society? Or are they also going to be maybe taken back to their countries of origin? What is the future of the asylum seekers from Libya in this country?
Thank you. We are talking about emergency transit mechanism. On the principle, the concept of the ETM, the way we call it, the ETM is to have these people being evacuated to Rwanda just for their safety, first of all. Secondly, we know that they can go back home. That's the refugee concept. You cannot go back home because you fled your country. But now when you're settled in Rwanda, you have peace, you have security, then you can think twice. So we have three options for them. The first one is, of course, the better one is to go back home if the situation back home allows. The second one is to go to a third country. If the receiving countries like in Europe, in America, in Australia, in Asia, if they can receive them, those are the options that the UNHCR is working on. And the third one, if you cannot get any of the two options, you can stay in Rwanda because, as the government said, the doors are open. So you can stay in Rwanda. You can stay as not, of course, as a refugee, but you can also stay as a refugee, or you can stay like a normal citizen who is a foreigner, and you stay in Rwanda.
Okay. Brenda, would you like to weigh in before we go back with our guest?
Just to say that I think all countries have a responsibility to be part of this exercise.
Yes.
So countries that actually take the challenge, I think, should be commended. Yes. And also the fact that, I mean, as Rwanda, looking at our history, not so many years ago, we were, many Rwandans were relocating. But, because of the significant work that has gone into rebuilding the country, now we can actually say we are opening our doors to, to other people to come in. And that's something that we shouldn't take for granted. But again, I feel that this responsibility has to be shared. And so far, African countries don't have actually a good record in terms of sharing responsibilities. And my fear would be that since Rwanda has taken the lead and said, you're welcome to come, you'll have other countries not worry about it. But we know, even with the support of UNHCR in terms of financial resources, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, to have a proper, resettlement program for it to take off. So my question to the PS would be, have you had any kind of engagement? Because we understand that this is a responsibility that should be shared. And now we are seeing that most of these people, they are coming from our neighboring countries, actually. Have you had any engagement, for instance, with your neighbors to say, okay, you should probably also share the responsibility?
I think the request to share the responsibility was done in 2017 by His Excellency the President of the Republic when he was in Abidjan. I think there was the 5th summit, EU and Africa.
Yeah.
By that time, in his speech, he said that this is a responsibility that Africa should share.
Yes.
By that, I think that's the responsibility that the call we can make to African countries. But then, when we start acting, it will be hard for Rwanda to say we are receiving this, and then we call for other countries to continue receiving them. We do our part. The African Union is leading, and they will be making the call. It's not upon the Rwandan government to make the call. We have the African Union, which is leading us in this process.
And if maybe I think what we'd also like, because you touched a bit on it, if you could tell us about this whole framework. Like, what is the genesis? Where did it start? I know it started, we know it started in 2017 between the African Union, UNHCR, and the government of Rwanda, but if you could shed a bit more light on the general framework and the genesis of this framework. Okay.
Well, as you mentioned, it started in 2017 with a call of His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, to take in 30,000 migrants. But having said that, between then and now, the conditions in Libya are deteriorating. And as a result of that, UNHCR in Libya is finding it difficult to provide protection and assistance to refugees and asylum seekers who are trapped in Libya. So we are finding it difficult to protect or assist them or to provide solutions. And so the High Commissioner reached out to the president of Rwanda, asking him whether he would consider refugees. And in April 2019, we had a visit from a UNHCR team, the African Union, to Rwanda. They also met with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they met with the EU, IOM, etc. And the plea was to still reinforce conditions in Libya, difficulty in protecting, assisting those stranded there, and to request the president to consider receiving the refugees. And in May, the government of Rwanda agreed. What then happened was there is an emergency transit mechanism in Libya. So there was a joint...
The first on the continent?
The first on the continent, yes. In Niger.
Okay.
So there was a joint visit by the government of Rwanda, UNHCR and the AU to Niger to see the emergency transit mechanism there, how it works, and to learn lessons, also to study the solutions being proposed. And that sort of shaped the Memorandum of Understanding, which is the framework on which it works. And just before I go into the modalities, I think it would be good for your viewers also to understand a bit more what this emergency transit mechanism is all about. And basically it has 4 components. The first one deals with travel arrangements, and the second one is reception facilities, and then the third one is case processing, and the final one is solutions. And with this emergency transit mechanism, we are talking about refugees and asylum seekers. And basically, it doesn't cover Rwandans, of course, or Libyans, but people who have been recognized as refugees stranded in Libya, or asylum seekers who have been registered by UNHCR pending the review of their cases. Because you remember I mentioned that the situation in Libya is such that we are not able as UNHCR to do protection and assistance. So part of the rationale of having the ETM here is to enable us as UNHCR to look into the cases of these people who are stranded and then provide solutions. The MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, which is the framework, is actually signed by 3 parties. We have the African Union, we have the government of Rwanda, and UNHCR. And it somehow addresses a bit of your question, if Rwanda does it, will other African countries do it or not? And by having the AU taking the lead, it is to also encourage other African countries. It's seen as an African solution to the problem. Under the MOU, each party has responsibilities. For the AU, they are helping with high-level advocacy, amongst others, and also talking to other donors. And the government of Rwanda, of course, gave us the sites. They guarantee access to the territory of Rwanda, the security of the refugees and asylum seekers when they come. And also, it goes in line with the work we do as UNHCR here, looking after other refugees and asylum seekers. So we have lots of relationships with the government of Rwanda through MINIMA in that regard. And UNHCR, we provide protection and assistance. Yes, the government of Rwanda provides the transit center, or the ETM, and UNHCR makes sure that the refugees and asylum seekers are fed. The ETM is well provisioned, and like I mentioned earlier, as part of the healing, we also provide health services, language training, psychosocial support, and also want to provide livelihoods. And then linked to that, of course, it's our mandate, which is to assess the protection cases, assist, and also look at the solutions the PS of MINIMA talked about and how to realize it.
When you say the protection cases, what do you mean exactly?
Well, as I said, I mentioned they are refugees and they are asylum seekers. Asylum seekers, when they come, we have what we call refugee status determination. And so we talk to them, we have questions we ask to determine whether they are refugees. Yeah.
So that's the difference between asylum
seekers and refugees. Yes.
And Mr. Kayumba, if you can also shed light, because I think the general public in Rwanda is wondering, you know, as a small country that has limited resources and so forth and so on, what is our capacity to handle refugees in general? And one, and then two, how many other refugees are we expecting to evacuate from Libya? We know these are 66, and there are numbers that say vary around 500 more that are coming.
Thank you. Let me start by the second question. We have a second group that is expected in October. We don't have all the details, but as you said, the MOU talked about 500 refugees as a start. So we are having in the process with the UNHCR to evacuate them on their side and for us to receive them in the country. Yes. We'll be receiving them in Gashora, all of them so far, and we have a big capacity in Gashora for that. On the first question, if we, as a country, as a small country, as you said, but we are small, but let me say in Kinyarwanda, we are not Gito. We can accommodate everyone. Yes. Our doors are open. We have currently 149,000, more than 149,000 yes. Refugees in the country. Having 500 more, it's not a big issue for us at all. Yes. We, as you said, and as my colleague was saying, we have an experience of refugee status, Rwandan more than 30 years abroad, and we are really sensitive on that issue. Everyone seeking refuge in Rwanda, we welcome them. So the capacity we have, the little we can have, we can share with everyone.
Yeah. I really like that mindset, and this is what embodies what we are doing as a country. I think this is why we open our doors to refugees in this sense, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to carry on in terms of the implications of this whole resettlement program. And I'm a bit surprised that you don't have enough information yet on the rest. 66, the numbers for the 500. And that points to a bigger problem that we have had in this whole process in terms of information flow. You know, at first, it came and it was like a rumor, and then finally it's happening.
And then there are also rumors that I would like you to also put forward about Rwanda being paid.
Yes,
I think you remember those rumors last year.
Yes, it started, you know, as a rumor.
Yes.
And then there was a statement. And the concern is the information flow has been really, in my view, limited. And I wonder why. And the reason I wonder why is because I think transparency would be really, really key in this whole process, because if these people are coming to stay with us as Rwandans, we need to understand who are they, where are they coming, and what is going to happen. Because at the end of the day, I think you need the goodwill and public support, you know, to be able to have a successful program. So why have we had, you know, issues around information flow?
The information flow, it depends on how you state it. On our side, we cannot give out information of what we don't have. But what we had at first, and as my colleague Barbara said, we had discussions on the government side. All the discussions were public. I mean, information was put in public, I think by April. Even when the UNHCR High Commissioner came in April, he paid the courtesy to His Excellency the President of the Republic. They talked about it, and the information was out. When we started discussing at the AU level, the information was out. We did not make it public. You know, we are not having people who are vulnerable, and then we welcome them as champions of football. No, we are talking about vulnerable people. We can't make just a big show on the arrival. But the discussion there, when we had the MOU signing, the discussion before with the UN, the UNHCR and the AU, we gave out that information, and the signing was on 10th of September.
In
we had
2018?
2019.
2019. Oh, this year, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
this
yes,
year.
Yes, yes.
We had the press conference. I mean, it was signed in Addis Ababa. There was a press conference in Addis Ababa. At the same time, I think a few hours later, I think around 11 local time, we had the press conference by the Honorable Minister of Minema and the UNHCR representative. The information was there. There was a rumor, I mean, you call it a rumor, but we had information of the first group. At first it was 75 people. We announced it, but later we got 66. The number, the figure changes, but it's not on the Rwandan side. It's on the side of Libya. You plan for 75. I'm not sure if it was a problem of the plane or documentation, but we received 66. We informed, I think on the same day in the morning, we informed the public that we are going to receive 66 people. On the local side, we have got discussions with the Eastern Province. We got discussions with the mayor of Bugesera, and we had a week before, we had on Tuesday, we have inteko z'abaturage. We had to explain in Gashora, Umurenge wa Gashora, I think, I don't remember the Kagari. We had to explain to abaturage that we are receiving people. We gave all those information. Probably we don't do it public and go showing that we are doing that, but we did our best to share information. The issue I got in the press, some complaints that we didn't allow them to receive them at the airport. We only allowed Arabia, which was there at the arrival. The arrival was supposed to be at 7 p.m. Later it went to 9:30 p.m. I mean, you cannot have a show when you're receiving people who are vulnerable. We only allowed Arabia, which was there. And we took some photos that we shared, and that was the communication plan we shared to every house, media house in Rwanda and abroad. So I think we did our best. Probably next time we are having a better plan that we work together and you give us ideas. We welcome all the ideas. As you were asking about the second group. The second group is coming in October, as I said. If you want a figure, I'll give you a figure right now. But on the D-Day, the figure might change. I might be having, we would say, between 100 and 130. Let me give you that range, only that. If I give you an exact figure, you'll ask me, where's the other one? I don't know where. And
Brenna will. I know she will.
No, just to clarify,
Yes.
I understand that there's an effort that has been made in terms of communication, but quite often what we see is that the communication is actually internal. There's so much going on within the different agencies because this is a multi-agency, operation.
Yes.
So you get a sense that perhaps people interpret internal communication as external communication. And I will tell you why. The reason I'm asking this question is, when they arrived, we tried to send out reporters to try and get information on the ground. And the local officials were referring us to UNHCR, to your ministry. Now, you're telling me today that there were local briefings. How come the local officials on the ground could not just give context? So, and of course, it's not easy to give information around vulnerable people. But I would have appreciated, for instance, if you had sent out guidelines to reporters, even how to report, issues around refugees. Because what we've seen, pictures of, children, which ideally shouldn't be happening. We are not sure they have written consent from their parents. And, there are all sorts of ethical considerations around dealing with. So part of the communication before they arrived should have been that, for instance, you know, these are vulnerable people. You shouldn't have expectations around, for instance, wait with microphones and be interviewing these people.
Absolutely.
You know, yeah.
Well,
so,
yeah, and I like that. I'd like us to go to a Twitter feed, and just touch on what you're talking about, Brenna, and also PS, what you mentioned. And the first tweet that we have is actually talking about the whole concept of pictures and so forth that you said, Brenna. It is from Anj, and Anj says, I'd love for you to touch on consent regarding media portrayal of the refugees, particularly the use of photos. Also, citizens' responsibility in the way we freely discuss their cases and post, share, exchange photos willy-nilly of the vulnerable people that make up this group. So I really think in the coming days, PS and Barbara, yeah, this information should be put forward to the general public in Rwanda about these vulnerable people and how we discuss, how we post, how we share, and how we contextualize their experiences. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I agree with it's an opinion, and I agree with that. What we'll do is to have our colleagues in the media, the Office of the Government Spokesperson, our PRO, to try to take lessons of this, the first arrival, how we managed it, how the expectations of the population, the expectation of the media. We have currently the request to visit the Gashora Center, but we want these people to be settled, to have peace. They were traumatized. Some of them are in the hospital. We want to make sure that everyone is calm so that we can allow media. And we are going to plan one tour with the media. We don't want everyone to go in the morning, the other one in the afternoon, the next day, on the weekend. We want to make it
emotionally exhausting for
It's exhausting.
them.
It's exhausting.
Yes.
I agree with you with the photos that we have been seeing all around. You know, you cannot just close everything. You know, at the airport, someone can come and take a picture. At the reception center, you have seen the mayor of Bugesera receiving them. It was an act of compassion to receive these people. If photos are taken there, you cannot just go like a police, don't take photos, don't take photos. But we understand the dignity of these people, the vulnerability they have, and we are going to work on it. And we cannot make it a show that what we are going to summon this and this. No, we are trying our best way to deal with the media issue.
The next tweet that we have is from Vijay Nano Kigali, and this, I think maybe Barbara, you'll be able to answer this, although I don't know if you have the information too, but it's to do with security. So he says, question rather out of curiosity and also experience. Libya, as we all know, went into a meltdown with the civil war and is said to be the birthplace of ISIS, which later spread to Syria. What screening techniques does the UNHCR use to ensure no insurgent sleeper cells exist when, and I think we can go quickly to the next tweet, no insurgent sleeper cells exist when dispatching from such war-stricken nations that are predominant with news of terrorists from the notorious Al-Shabaab and ISIS factions. Some of them can recruit members to be underground in quotes for up to 20 years and have them dispatched as refugees to annoying nations. So the question is quite long.
Yes.
I think in brief what Vijay Nano Kigali is saying is, you know, what's the screening method to ensure that when we have refugees being evacuated from one country to another, in this case from Libya to Rwanda, that you know, there's a security measure to screen to avoid you know, the exportation of terrorism.
Okay, it's quite a pertinent but a difficult question to answer.
I can imagine.
More so, we are at the receiving end here in Rwanda. But generally, these people, the refugees and asylum seekers from Libya, the first group anyway, came by air. And they were screened like all travelers. At Libya, I cannot speak to conditions there, how the screening was done, but I presume they were screened. But upon arrival here in Rwanda, they went through the screening we go through, their baggage was checked. And I presume that is the sort of security screening that has been done. I cannot, of course, speak to people being insurgents or whatever, but even before they leave Libya, they get exit permits. And one would think that some sort of attention is paid to that issue.
And on the Libyan side, like, for instance, what is the selection process? I know you can't speak much of it, but you know, can you just give us a sort of outline? Are they from the detention centers, like, who goes and selects and says, okay, this 66 out of, we are told, you know, there are around 5,000 detention centers. So who selects which detention center to go to, which number to get? You know, can you give us a rough idea on how that process happens?
Yes, what happens is that there are detention centers in Libya, like you mentioned, but one should be aware there's still conflict going on.
Of course.
So UNHCR, we don't have access even to all the detention centers. We go where we can, and the emphasis is on the most vulnerable who are trapped. And so we go to the detention centers that we can access, focusing on the most vulnerable. And these are the people who are then brought to the departure facility, which is run by UNHCR. In addition to that, there are refugees and asylum seekers in Libya, an urban caseload. And we have community centers within Libya, and some of these vulnerable cases are identified from there, and they are also brought to the transfer facility, which UNHCR runs. So in terms of identification, that is how the process runs, from detention centers and also from the urban caseload, with the focus on the most vulnerable.
Yes, Marna?
Just very briefly on Nano's question around security. I think it goes back to what I earlier said in terms of public awareness, the campaign, information, because you will find all sorts of concerns.
Yes.
So I think there has to be a deliberate effort in terms of reassuring, you know, citizens that, look, these people who are coming in, like she's saying, have been screened. You don't have to worry, because, again, because of perhaps lack of information, some may assume that these people are just brought in and taken to a place, and that's how it is. So I think the work is cut out for whoever is in charge of information for this program. There has to be a lot of, you know, public campaigns to educate people, allay fears.
Especially in communities,
you know,
because you talked about the resettlement, you know, long term. I mean, you can't say right now, but those who will be resettled in communities out of Kigali to start with, you know.
And there's always the risk of misinformation.
Yes.
You know, misinformation is a big problem, and we know how it goes viral. So
the spread of fake news.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I would like to react on that. I'm not sure that our citizens are not aware. Of course, you cannot be aware in details of what is happening, but our people, they trust in our government institutions. You cannot have a campaign every time you receive people. We have received since 1995 or 96. We have received Congolese. We have received Burundians in 2015. You cannot go every time say that, look, this is a major campaign we're having. But we're having campaigns, discussions with the local authorities to tell them, like in 2015, we are receiving refugees from Burundi. This is where they'll be staying, and that's it. The government knows what it's doing, and the people, they trust the government. You cannot have a campaign, as you said. I know journalists, you like having big shows, big programs. You're right, yes, but we are doing the way we do, always do. We have all sorts of campaigns that we do, and things are going on. I have not seen something that has...
Let me be clear.
Yes.
I mean, we have been receiving refugees, but we also have to remember that the countries where these people are coming from is where, you know, the fears are coming from. You know, it's Libya, it's Somalia, and already people know or have heard what has been happening in those countries. So why one may think that there's a need for reassurance is because of the specific countries where, you know, these refugees specifically are coming from. Because it's not like the other countries where we have not, like he alluded to, you know, ISIS, Al-Shabaab. I think it would be,
we are bringing up a wrong debate. We have people who are vulnerable, who are trying to flee their country because of the dramatic situation in that country. So they have ended up in Libya, not because they are terrorists or they are bandits or I don't know what. These are vulnerable people trying to flee their country. So we are having them in Rwanda for their safety. And let us be positive. You cannot receive someone and you start questioning, is he a terrorist? I mean, let us give them.
You and I can understand that perfectly.
Yes.
We have the privilege of having information, of being educated, of being exposed. Yeah? But that is us who are privileged.
Yes.
So I wouldn't want to assume that everybody is as privileged as I am to have the information. And this is why I feel that, you know, it doesn't have to be massive, but let us think about umuturage who may not really have the information and perhaps may be vulnerable to misinformation. That's the only concern that I have.
Yeah, but I don't know where the misinformation will come from, probably from the media, and we have to be cautious on that. I like the media. Don't think that I don't like the media. But the Baturage, to reach the Baturage, it will not be the minister or the permanent secretary to go to the Mudugudu where we have the ETM. We have talked to the governor. We talked to the security organs in Eastern Province. We talked to the mayor. We talked to the executive of the Umurenge, up to Akagari. And we had Inteko y'Abaturage on Tuesday, the week before. I'll welcome more forum to inform the Baturage, and we'll do it with no problem at all.
I would like us to take the next couple of minutes just talking about the general refugee crisis, the global refugee crisis, but starting with Libya. And again, Barbara, I know you're trying your best. You're not based in Libya. The UNHCR doesn't have access to move freely around in Libya and deal with these issues. But I think one of the key things that I really wanted to bring up is to do with the situation in Libya specifically. So UN estimates show that there are around 42,000 refugees in Libya at the moment as we speak. But you know, a lot of them endure what is termed as modern day slavery. I think we also that video, the CNN video around 2 years ago, that showed these refugees being literally auctioned off for sale, like cattle. And this is, most of them, this is when they try to cross the Mediterranean, of course, and don't make it. So this is what's happening in Libya. So my question is there a sort of, I don't know, justice for these victims? Are there initiatives on the ground that are dealing with providing, well, first of all, ameliorating the situation as it is, or providing justice to victims, to refugees who are victims of this abuse during their stay in this country? Would you know?
Like I keep saying, still there's war going on in Libya.
There is.
So that is even the rationale for having this ETM here. I can't speak to whether or not there's justice, but having painted that picture, you can imagine it would be difficult to implement such a process. But in terms of justice for the refugees, I think them even being here in Rwanda gives them a new chance at rebuilding their lives. I spoke about us giving them language training, looking at how we can empower them through livelihoods. And through that, I think in a way it gives them the ability to rebuild their lives. And perhaps at some point in time, they might want to seek justice. But beyond that, it's a very complex issue, which even goes beyond the UN. Because first of all, I think the crux would be peace in Libya, before you could then talk about having justice or retribution for what has taken place.
Absolutely. I really like the point. I think the first thing was to be, sort of restore peace in Libya as a country before we then deal with the different elements that are a result of that war that's happening.
If I may come in there, I was just thinking about How do we help these vulnerable people to become productive members of the society again? What kind of programs are you considering? What are the resources that are available? And I realize you keep mentioning English, but I hope Kinyarwanda is a priority.
Definitely, so they can go to the markets and bargain, interact with the host community. But we did have some discussions with the initial group, and funny enough, majority wanted to learn English. But in terms of programs, we had already proposed both Kinyarwanda and English. Looking at the profile of the first group that has come, you have mixed level of education. We even have 2 university graduates.
Oh, wow.
But you also have people who are illiterate, but the majority of them are people who have gone to primary school, lower level, and you also have some between primary and secondary, that is high school. What we've been discussing is for those who can enter the TVETs that we have, together with, of course, Minima representing the government of Rwanda. We have a livelihood strategy, and TVETs, it's something that we are working together at for our refugees in general. So this would be an opportunity for some. Based on the background also, we are looking at skills training. But I cannot tell you exact skills, because part of our work is to discuss with the group, get to know them better, what they would like to do, to be able to equip them with skills that can help them as they are waiting here for solutions, and also equip those who would be resettled wherever they go to be productive citizens when they go, and for those who will opt for longer term stay in Rwanda also to be productive citizens.
I think we can borrow a leaf, PS, over, and I'll ask this, I'll posit this to you. I think we can borrow a leaf from Rwanda's, intake of refugees, for instance, is from 2015 from Burundi. If you could shed more light on this. I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can take practices or initiatives that have worked between, within refugees that are in Rwanda who came from Burundi, and apply them to those that remain here, because we know that we have been integrating refugees from Burundi in Rwanda, providing free education, facilitating their employment. Can you just shed a bit more light on the current
the current situation where we are now, and compared with our grandfathers and relatives they got in the past years. We are currently having, for example, for people who are not camp-based, who are in town or in other cities, we're having for them insurance, mutuelle de santé. It's a big step towards them. For us, the government of Rwanda, we might not think that it's a big issue, but for the refugees who are benefiting from those programs, they are really having a big chance to get medical services. Everyone is getting an ID. One can say how this is very normal. Yes, but in Africa, in many countries, the refugee does not hold an ID. We are having everyone. I think today we are having the last verification exercise in Mahama, in Kirehe. All the refugees are having their ID, at least those above 16. And then you can go to the bank. It's not today. We are talking about it today, but those who came in 1996, they have already their IDs, and they're financially included in the system. You have access to your mobile money, you have access to your account, anything. It's a bunch of conditions that we set for every refugees. They're in schools. In 6 districts, they are having their program of the government of Rwanda. They are sitting with Rwandans in their schools. We set all sorts of conditions at least to have them feel better. And the same we'll be having it's a particular because those ones are, the Burundians and the Congolese are neighbors. So we know each other, we have almost the same culture. But those who are coming from Somalia, Sudan, it will be a bit more difficult for them. But the government of Rwanda with the UNHCR, we set up all conditions. And I think after the traumatized period is healing, they'll be used, they'll go to the market. You'll make your own effort. You know, when a foreigner is in a country, you make sure that you go to meet people, you start learning, mwaramutse, mwiriwe. It's a bit difficult, but muraho, that one I know they will, by today, I know muraho, murakoze, and then they will go to the market if they want. Some of those countries, they like spices, you know, they'll go and bargain to the market and know akavanga, they'll know rusenda, and all. Those are things that will be coming. And as you said, we'll be having TVET school for them. We're having 2 in university, so we have some institutions like Kepler or any other higher learning institution that will be helping them to pursue their school. Those who will be going for a third country, they will go. Those will be remaining here in Rwanda. They have every condition set for them. That's what I can say.